Hey guys, Scott here, and today I want to talk about teammate-induced tunneling, which is a term a commenter on YouTube by the name of Riley said, and it's something I think we're all familiar with, but I think that's a really good way to put it. So, teammate-induced tunneling is basically when the killer tunnels you, but not because the killer wants to tunnel you. It's because your teammates have kind of put the killer in in a position where that's kind of the only option that they have. So I'll give you the biggest example of when this happens. And I thought about this a lot more, and it actually applies to a lot of things, not just this one specific instance of tunneling. But so the best example of this is when a killer will hook somebody, and then they'll see somebody with barbecue and chili, and then they'll go across, the map somewhere else, and they'll go look for that guy. But that guy hid or something like that, and they can't find him. So the killer has no one to look for right now. They kicked the gen. There's nothing else to do in the area. They couldn't find the survivor. Guy gets unhooked now. And so the killer does the only thing that he can do is go to the only location that he knows of a survivor, which is the previous hook. So he goes back to the hook, and he only finds the scratch marks of the guy that was on the hook before. And so this happens because the rescuing teammate doesn't try to pull any aggro from the boss, basically, and they just hide. And because of that scenario, the killer has no option but to tunnel because they can't find the person that did the unhook. So in that scenario, it's ridiculous to assume the killer should ignore the injured person that was just on the hook running past them and spend time looking for the Claudette that's hiding in a bush after she unhooked somebody. That's ridiculous. Yeah, you can play very nice like that as a killer if you want, but expecting the killer to do that is just really silly. So in that scenario, the only reason that the killer's actually tunneling is because the survivors that made the rescue enable the killer to do that. So the general PSA for this is, in that scenario, if you're going to unhook somebody and be, a good teammate, continue to be a good teammate. Don't just unhook someone and just hide. That's essentially just farming them at that point, even if they get a bit of a head start. If the killer is somewhere in the terror radius and you hide, chances are the person that's injured is not going to be able to hide unless they have iron will. And also they're bleeding too. So the person that's coming off the hook is 10 times easier to find than the person that does the unhooking. And so the killer will probably go for them if that's the only person they can see. I try my hardest to not tunnel off the hook or anything like that. And so I will look for the person that did the unhooking. But if I really can't find them, they're doing everything in their power to hide. And fuck it, I'm going to tunnel that guy off the hook. And I don't even feel bad about it because that's the only option I was presented with. And I realize this extends past just tunneling. There is teammate-induced camping. There's basically every shitty thing a killer can do. A lot of it is based on the fact that the survivors kind of force the killer into that scenario. Slugging is another really good example of this. For example, the only time you actually slug as a killer is not for spite, not to bore survivors. You only slug when everybody is in the same area because, it makes sense. You see two guys working on a generator. You down one guy working on the gen. What, are you just going to ignore the second guy and just pick him up and then take him to the hook? No, you're going to down the first guy and start chasing the second guy who's still working on the generator in front of you. That's the only move you can make. Doing anything else is intentionally playing worse than you're supposed to. It's not even mean at that point. It's just the only option you should really have. And so that scenario, that slugging, is brought on by the fact that the survivors are all just in the same spot. That's not like the killer said, I'm going to go out of my way with my, 0 perks that involve slugging and just slug the whole team. The only time that happens is when the survivors group up together. That's it. So even in that scenario, that's something that's kind of more on the survivors than the killer, because the killer can't just decide to slug people. He has to be presented with an opportunity where it's a good idea to do so. Now, the killer can do that technically just to be a dick, but it's honestly worse for him at that point to just slug one guy at the other end of the map. It's better to just hook them. It doesn't even make any sense. And there's also another example like teammate-induced camping where, we've all been in this scenario. You're on the hook and someone is just looping the killer 10 feet away from the hook. What is the killer supposed to do? He's not going to leave the area. He's now pressuring two survivors at once, and he's still just honestly chasing you while also still camping the other guy. These are all scenarios that happen in a lot of games, and it's not the killer's fault, really. It's almost always the survivor's fault in those scenarios. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there are not killers that go out of their way to tunnel and camp and just be a dick on purpose, because they absolutely do exist. And I'm not even saying that the survivors doing these things are intentionally being an asshole or anything like that. Sometimes they're just inexperienced. They don't realize that what they're doing is getting their teammates killed. This is more just a PSA for those situations to try to be aware. Don't loop around your teammates that are on the hook. Don't crawl under the hook if you get downed, because then that just makes it so that the killer will camp 2 people for free. Don't ever do that. Don't hide when you rescue people. Just all things like that. These are just sort of PSAs to be a better teammate, and it'll actually end up making the killer play a nicer, fairer game if you don't present them with the opportunities to do these shitty things, because that's the only option they're presented with. So that is it, guys. Just a small PSA, and thank you again, Riley, for the idea. This is actually something I do feel pretty strongly about. I do get really annoyed when teammates sandbag other teammates due to lack of situational awareness. So that is it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.